The laughter began before the Duke of Ashbourne had even finished introducing his new wife. Lady Beatrice raised her champagne glass and asked whether the servants should curtsy to Clara or hand her an apron. Every noble at the wedding breakfast laughed. Clara stood beside her husband in a plain ivory gown, her hands bearing the faint scars of 12 years spent polishing their silver and carrying their coal. The Duke could have silenced them with one sentence, yet he said nothing. He only placed a small brass key in Clara's palm beneath the table. No one noticed except Lord Edwin Vale, the Duke's cousin, whose smile vanished the instant he recognized it. That key belonged to a locked room beneath Ashbourne Hall, a room the previous Duke had ordered sealed before his mysterious death. Society believed Ashbourne had sacrificed his name for a servant. But Clara knew the marriage was connected to a secret powerful men had already killed to protect. She closed her fingers around the key before Edwin could study it further. Its teeth pressed painfully into her skin. Clara welcomed the pain. It gave her something solid to resist, while 30 guests examined her as though she were an animal that had somehow wandered into the ducal seat. Lady Beatrice's laughter faded into a satisfied smile. "Well, Your Grace, shall we expect the new Duchess to answer?" Clara felt Nicholas Ashbourne's hand tense beside hers. He had been Duke of Ashbourne for only 6 months, yet sorrow had already carved hard lines around his mouth. His father's sudden death had left him with a title, a mountain of debts, and a family that seemed determined to watch him fail. "My wife is not required to entertain insults at her own table," Nicholas said. The words were controlled, but they came too late. He had allowed the first laughter to spread. Clara could not tell whether his delay had been caution, shame, or something more deliberate. Lady Beatrice lowered her glass. "Of course not. A servant is usually expected to remain silent." Several guests laughed again. Clara rose. Nicholas turned sharply. "Clara, if Lady Beatrice requires an answer, she shall have one." The room stilled. Clara had learned long ago that aristocrats became most uncomfortable when servants spoke without trembling. "The household will curtsy according to rank," she said, "but no one at Ashbourne Hall will ever be ordered to surrender dignity for another person's amusement. As for the apron, I shall keep one. Honest work has never embarrassed me." A footman near the wall lowered his face, concealing a smile. Lady Beatrice's cheeks darkened. Edwin applauded twice. "What admirable spirit," he said. He was handsome in the polished, unmemorable way of men who had spent their lives being forgiven. "My dear cousin has always enjoyed rescuing injured creatures." Nicholas pushed back his chair, but Clara caught his sleeve. The movement exposed Edwin's left hand. A dark red cut ran across his thumb, fresh enough that a trace of dried blood remained beside the nail. Clara stared at it. 3 nights earlier, someone had entered the old Duke's library and searched the locked writing desk. Clara had discovered a splinter of mahogany on the carpet and a spot of blood beneath the broken drawer. Nicholas had dismissed it as damage caused by an impatient creditor. Edwin followed her gaze and folded his hand beneath the table. Clara's pulse quickened. A servant approached carrying roasted pheasant. Before he reached Edwin, the young man stumbled. The platter tilted, sending sauce across the white cloth. Edwin seized the servant by the wrist. "You clumsy fool!" The boy's face went pale. Clara recognized him as Thomas Bell, the under-footman who had delivered her anonymous warning the previous evening. He had sworn he did not know who had written it. "Do not enter the room beneath the west wing. The last person who opened it was buried before morning." "Release him," Clara said. Edwin looked amused. "You have been a duchess for less than an hour, and already presume to command me?" "I command this household." Nicholas rose beside her. "You heard my wife." For a moment, Edwin's pleasant expression disappeared. Then he released Thomas with a soft laugh. "My apologies, Your Graces. I am still learning the new order of things." As Thomas hurried away, Clara saw him deliberately place something beneath the edge of her plate, a torn strip of blue paper. She covered it with her napkin. The wedding breakfast resumed, but the mockery had changed. The guests no longer merely laughed at her. They watched her, especially Edwin. Nicholas leaned closer. "At midnight, the west corridor will be empty. The key opens the iron door at the bottom of the servants' stairs. You told me that room had been sealed by your father's order." "It was. And now?" Now I need you to see what he hid there." Clara studied the man she had married that morning. Their agreement had been clear. Nicholas would protect her from whoever had searched the library, and she would help him understand the irregularities concealed in the estate accounts. He had never mentioned possessing the key. Why give it to me in front of Edwin? Nicholas glanced across the table. His cousin was speaking to Lady Beatrice, but his attention remained fixed on them. I needed to know whether he recognized it. Cold realization moved through Clara. The public humiliation had not merely been tolerated. Nicholas had expected it. By allowing the guest to focus on the servant he had married, he had created the perfect distraction in which to test Edwin's reaction. Clara slipped the blue paper from beneath her plate. Only 4 words had survived where it had been torn from a larger document. The Duchess must enter alone. She looked toward Thomas, but the footman had vanished. Nicholas believed he had used their cruel laughter to set a trap for Edwin. Clara now understood that someone else had used the same humiliation to set a trap for her. Clara folded the strip of blue paper beneath her palm before Nicholas could see it. She did not yet know whether the warning had come from a friend, an enemy, or someone attempting to divide them, but she knew better than to surrender the only advantage she possessed. Across the room, Lord Edwin continued speaking to Lady Beatrice while watching Clara's reflection in the silver urn between them. "Your cousin is waiting for us to react," Clara murmured. "Then we shall disappoint him," Nicholas replied. He offered his arm and announced that his bride required a moment away from the celebrations. The guests' expressions made clear what they imagined the former maid could not endure, but Clara crossed the breakfast room without lowering her head. Once the doors closed behind them, Nicholas guided her through the portrait gallery toward the eastern drawing room. "Show me the message Thomas gave you," he said. Clara stopped. "You saw him?" "I saw Edwin's secretary leave the room moments before Thomas approached your chair. I also saw you hide something beneath your napkin. Yet you said nothing. Had I spoken, Edwin would have known the message reached you." His explanation was reasonable, but reason did not make trust automatic. Clara handed him the paper. Nicholas read the 4 words twice, then examined its torn edge. "This came from one of my father's account books. How can you be certain?" He purchased blue ledger paper from a stationer in Bath. He claimed the color helped him separate estate records from personal correspondence. Clara touched the faint horizontal ruling. During her years below stairs, she had seen bundles of the same paper carried into the old Duke's study, but the household servants had been forbidden to enter while the ledgers were open. Why would part of an account book contain instructions about me? Nicholas folded the fragment and returned it. "That is what we must discover tonight. It says I must go alone. You will not. If someone is watching the corridor, your presence may ensure the door is never opened." Nicholas's jaw tightened. "My father entered that room 6 days before his death. Dr. Harcourt called it an apoplexy, although he had shown no sign of illness before that week. And the key? I found it sewn inside the lining of his hunting coat yesterday." Clara remembered the coat. After the old Duke's death, Edwin had demanded that every garment in the dressing room be inventoried before Nicholas arrived from London. Clara had refused to release anything without the new Duke's written authority. At the time, Edwin had called her insolent. Now she understood that he might have been searching for the key. The drawing room door opened, and Mrs. Finch, the housekeeper, entered carrying a folded gown. She had served Ashbourne Hall for 32 years and had been the first person to teach Clara that servants survived not by knowing less than their employers, but by revealing less of what they knew. "Her Grace must change before the tenant's reception," she said formally. Once Nicholas withdrew, Mrs. Finch placed the gown on a chair and embraced Clara. "I would have boxed Lady Beatrice's ears if there had not been a Duke watching." Clara laughed despite herself. "Which Duke?" "Either of them." Mrs. Finch's warmth faded when Clara showed her the blue fragment. "Have you seen this handwriting?" Clara asked. The housekeeper examined the 4 block letters. "No, but I know the paper. His late Grace kept it in the West Archive." "Did you ever enter the room beneath the servants' stairs?" Mrs. Finch immediately returned the message. "No one entered it after Mr. Whitmore died." Clara's breath caught. "My father?" She had been told that Elias Whitmore, the former assistant steward, died after being thrown from his horse when she was 14. With no mother and no relatives willing to take her, Clara had been permitted to remain at Ashbourne as a scullery maid. What did he have to do with that room? Mrs. Finch looked toward the door. Your father was responsible for copying the estate's quarterly accounts. He discovered that grain recorded as spoiled had actually been sold through intermediaries. The money never reached the tenants or the estate. He believed someone was using the old passages beneath the west wing to store duplicate records. Why did no one tell me? Because the morning after he spoke to the Duke, his horse returned without him. The housekeeper's voice cracked. We found his body beside the north road. His neck was broken, and everyone accepted that he had fallen. But you did not. Your father never rode the north road. He feared the unstable bridge and always took the longer route through Merewood. Clara's fingers tightened around the brass key. The scars on her hands had begun in the scullery 2 weeks after her father's burial, when she was too young to challenge the explanation and too powerless to demand another. Mrs. Finch opened the wardrobe and removed an old wooden sewing box. From beneath its false bottom, she took a narrow book bound in cracked green leather. Your father gave this to me the night before he died. He made me promise not to give it to you unless someone tried to open the sealed room again. Clara turned the pages. Most contained household quantities, coal, grain, lamp oil and wages, written in her father's precise hand. Besides several entries were groups of dots and slashes that appeared meaningless. He taught me these inventory marks, Clara whispered. As a child, she had helped him count sacks in the granary, believing the strange symbols were a game. Each represented a correction, missing weight, changed destination, false date, or substituted signature. Her father had not merely copied the accounts. He had created a private record of every alteration. Near the final page, Clara found a rough drawing of the West Wing cellars and a single name written beside the sealed chamber, Vale. Footsteps sounded beyond the door. Mrs. Finch hid the book inside Clara's gown, just as the handle turned. Edwin entered without knocking. Forgive me, he said, his gaze moving from the sewing box to Clara's face. I came to offer the new Duchess a wedding gift. He placed a silver riding crop on the table. Its leather handle was stained with something dark, and burned into the shaft where the initials of Clara's dead father, Clara, did not reach for the crop. Her father's initials, E.W., were cut deeply into the silver, but the letters leaned to the right, while Elias Whitmore's carving knife had always drawn the final stroke of a W sharply to the left. She had watched him mark enough tools during childhood to recognize the difference. Someone had copied his initials without understanding his hand. Where did you find it? She asked. Edwin rested one shoulder against the doorframe. In a locked cabinet belonging to my late uncle. I thought you might appreciate having something that once belonged to your father. It never belonged to him. The amusement left Edwin's eyes. Clara lifted the crop by its silver shaft, avoiding the stained leather. My father disliked whips. After a stable boy was injured, he refused to carry one, even when the old Duke insisted. Mrs. Finch moved closer to Clara, but Edwin's gaze remained fixed on the hidden ledger beneath her gown. Memories become unreliable after 12 years, he said. Objects are often more truthful, only when they have not been manufactured for the purpose of lying. Nicholas entered before Edwin could answer. His eyes passed over Clara, Mrs. Finch, and the crop in one swift assessment. What are you doing in my wife's dressing room? Offering her a relic of her former life. Edwin bowed. Although her grace appears unwilling to accept kindness. Leave. Nicholas's voice contained none of the restraint he had shown at breakfast. Edwin's smile returned, but as he passed Clara, he murmured, Midnight is a dangerous hour for those who mistake cleverness for protection. When the door closed, Nicholas took the crop from her. His presence here proves he knows about the chamber. It proves he wishes us to believe he knows. Clara showed him the false direction of the carved W, but did not reveal her father's book. Edwin had entered at precisely the moment Mrs. Finch produced it. Until Clara knew how he had learned where to look, she would not expose the ledger to anyone, not even her husband. Nicholas examined the dark stain. Blood? Perhaps, but not my father's. This leather is scarcely 5 years old. She pointed to a tiny crowned stag stamped near the seam. The royal saddler adopted that mark after receiving its warrant in 1812. My father died in 1808. Nicholas stared at her, then at the crop. How do you know a saddler's mark? I maintained the tackroom inventories after the former groom lost 3 bridles and blamed the stable boys. Every supplier's mark had to be recorded before payment was authorized. A reluctant admiration softened his expression. Then Edwin has given us proof of his own deception. not proof that would survive a magistrate. He will claim that a servant misidentified an old object. Clara wrapped the crop in linen and placed it inside the wardrobe. We must learn what the stain is and who purchased the crop. Before Nicholas could reply, the chapel bell sounded twice, summoning them to the tenants' reception. The gathering had been intended as a celebration, but when Clara entered the great hall on Nicholas's arm, she found frightened farmers clutching notices marked with the ducal seal. Mr. Samuel Reed, who leased 300 acres near Merewood, stepped forward. "Your Grace, we were told the rents are to be doubled before Michaelmas." Nicholas took the notice. "I issued no such order." Edwin, already standing beside the estate solicitor, expressed perfect surprise. "The instructions came from the steward's office. Perhaps your new domestic arrangements have caused confusion." A low murmur passed through the tenants. Clara asked to see the remaining notices. Nicholas handed them to her without hesitation. There were 18, all written on ordinary cream paper, each bearing a red wax impression of the Ashbourne seal. The amounts appeared varied, but Clara arranged the notices by tenant name and studied the figures. Her father's lessons returned with unexpected clarity. Never trust a total until the weight, date, and destination agree. "These increases are not random," she said. "Every revised rent equals the value of grain supposedly lost from that tenant's land during the previous harvest." Mr. Reed frowned. "There was no lost grain. My entire crop was delivered to the West Granary." Another farmer nodded. "Mine as well." Clara turned one notice toward Nicholas. "The false rent demands are being used to recover money already removed through fraudulent grain records. If the tenants pay, the missing funds will appear to have entered the estate legally." The solicitor adjusted his spectacles. "That is a grave accusation from someone unfamiliar with estate management." "Then test it." Clara requested the official harvest ledger. Edwin attempted to object, claiming it remained in the steward's office, but Nicholas ordered it brought immediately. When the book arrived, Clara compared the recorded losses with the notices. The figures matched to the shilling. Moreover, the ink used for the supposed harvest entries was darker than the entries above them. "These lines were added later," she said. The solicitor rubbed one page with a clean cloth. Nothing changed. "You cannot establish age by color alone." "No, but you can establish sequence." Clara pointed to a pale curve crossing the final digit. "This page was blotted after the original account was written. The false number lies over the blotting powder, which means it was added after the page had already been dried and closed." Silence spread through the hall. Nicholas ordered the rent increases suspended and directed the solicitor to preserve every notice. Relief broke across the tenants' faces, but Edwin's expression revealed something colder than anger. Clara had not merely contradicted him. She had shown the entire estate that the former servant could read the mechanisms hidden behind its respectable accounts. Mr. Reed removed his cap and thanked her. Other tenants followed, until the woman mocked at breakfast stood receiving their gratitude beneath the Ashbourne crest. Nicholas did not claim her discovery as his own. "Her Grace has protected every family in this room from an unlawful demand," he declared. "From this day forward, no alteration to an estate account will be enforced without her review." Applause rose from the tenants, hesitant at first, then strong enough to echo through the hall. Edwin left before it ended. That evening, Clara returned to her dressing room and found the wardrobe open. The crop remained wrapped in linen, but the silver shaft had been scrubbed clean and the dark stain removed. Nothing else appeared disturbed until she examined her father's green ledger. Someone had cut out the page bearing the cellar map and the name Vale. In its place lay a fresh strip of blue paper with a single sentence. "Your father discovered the missing grain too, and that is why his horse came home alone." Edwin had not invented the threat merely to frighten her. Someone inside Ashbourne Hall knew exactly what Elias Whitmore had uncovered, had access to Clara's locked room, and was deliberately erasing the same chain of evidence a second time. Clara locked the dressing room door and rang once for Mrs. Finch, then knelt beside the wardrobe without touching anything. The intruder had removed only the map and cleaned the riding crop, which meant destruction was not the sole purpose. Someone wanted her to understand that neither locked doors nor her new title could protect what she found. Mrs. Finch arrived with Nicholas, whom she had encountered in the corridor. Clara showed them the mutilated ledger and the new warning. Nicholas immediately sent for the house keys and ordered every servant entrance secured. "That will imprison the innocent while warning the guilty," Clara said. "The person who entered may possess a key we do not know exists." "Then what would you suggest?" "We behave as though nothing valuable was taken." She explained that the cellar map was incomplete, without the symbols appearing throughout the surviving pages. Her father had drawn the passages, but his coded corrections would determine which chamber held the altered records. If the thief believed Clara could no longer interpret the route, he might delay destroying whatever remained below the west wing. Nicholas accepted her reasoning and ordered Mrs. Finch to tell the staff that a wedding jewel had been misplaced but recovered. Before leaving, the housekeeper revealed that only 3 master keys opened Clara's rooms: her own, the Duke's, and the one kept inside the steward's locked office. Edwin had supervised that office since the old Duke's death. "Then Edwin entered," Nicholas said. "Or he allowed someone else to take the key," Clara replied. "We must not confuse access with guilt." His expression tightened. "You are defending him? I am defending the difference between suspicion and proof." Nicholas looked at her for a long moment. "My father's advisors have spent 6 months telling me what I wish to hear. You are the first person who insists upon what can be established." The compliment was quiet and without performance. It stirred something more dangerous than the admiration of the tenants had done, but Clara turned toward the damaged ledger before he could see it. Together they carried it to the library, where she arranged the remaining entries by date. Nicholas brought the estate harvest books and correspondence from the years before Elias Whitmore's death. They worked beyond midnight, their shoulders almost touching beneath the light of a single lamp. Clara discovered that her father's dot and slash marks corresponded not only to missing grain, but also to payments made for repairs that were never completed. Nicholas found letters in which Edwin's father, Sir Malcolm Vale, repeatedly urged the old Duke to sell western farmland to a private company called Merewood Improvement. "My father refused every offer," he said, yet the company continued paying surveyors. "Because it did not require ownership to profit from the land," Clara replied. "Only control of what moved across it." She placed a harvest account beside an invoice for canal transport. Grain recorded as spoiled at Ashbourne had been sold under another estate's name and carried south. The quantities matched precisely. Before dawn, Nicholas leaned back and rubbed his eyes. "You have done in hours what my solicitor failed to do in half a year." "Your solicitor may not have failed." Clara tapped the invoices. "He authenticated every one of these payments." Their fragile moment of trust hardened into alarm. Mr. Tobias Wren, the estate solicitor, had stood beside Edwin during the tenants' reception and challenged Clara's findings. He also controlled the legal copies of the Ashbourne seal. Nicholas rose. "I shall dismiss him this morning. If you do, he will disappear with the records we need. Let him believe we remain uncertain. And allow him to continue stealing? No, we alter what he is permitted to reach." Clara proposed moving the original accounts into the small morning room, where Mrs. Finch could control entry, while leaving convincing copies in the steward's office. Nicholas agreed, but when the household assembled after breakfast, Mr. Wren presented the plan as his own. He praised the improved safeguards I advised His Grace to adopt, and announced that Clara would assist by checking household totals under his supervision. Edwin offered his congratulations with a smile that invited the servants to believe the former maid had merely performed clerical work assigned by a wiser man. Nicholas opened his mouth to correct them, but Clara touched the table once, a signal they had agreed upon during the night. If Wren believed his theft of her achievement had succeeded, he might underestimate what she understood. Nicholas swallowed his anger. "Her Grace will have full access to every estate account," he said instead. Wren's smile faltered. "That would be highly irregular. So is losing thousands of pounds in grain." Clara spent the morning transferring selected documents with Thomas Bell's assistance. The young footman avoided her eyes until they were alone in the morning room. Then he confessed that Wren had ordered him to deliver the blue message at breakfast. "He said it came from His Grace," Thomas whispered. "When I realized it did not, I tried to warn Mrs. Finch, but Mr. Vale threatened to dismiss my mother from her cottage." Thomas's widowed mother depended upon the estate, and exposing him publicly would leave them both vulnerable. Clara removed the official household key from his care, and told the other servants that she had reassigned him to assist with inventory. The apparent demotion protected him from suspicion while keeping him close enough to speak safely. It also gave Edwin exactly the appearance he expected. Clara punishing a frightened servant. By afternoon, Lady Beatrice had transformed that appearance into a rumor that the new Duchess was crueler to servants than any woman born to rank. At the assembly in Merewood that evening, women turned their backs when Clara entered. Men who had applauded her investigation now whispered that she had stolen Mr. Wren's discovery and claimed it before the tenants. Clara endured the contempt because defending herself would expose Thomas, but Nicholas did not know why she remained silent. "Tell them the truth," he urged as the musicians prepared to play. Not when the truth would cost a widow her home. His frustration yielded to understanding. He bowed before her in full view of the room. "Then permit me to dance with the woman who saved my tenants." Clara placed her hand in his. The crowd's mockery did not disappear, but for the first time, Nicholas chose to stand inside it with her, rather than observe it from safety. As they moved across the floor, Clara noticed Wren speaking urgently to Edwin near the balcony. "She has more of Whitmore's records," the solicitor whispered, unaware that the music had briefly softened. "Then the servant must be removed before the royal audit," Edwin replied. He glanced toward Clara and smiled. "Fortunately, society already believes she married Ashbourne for money. We need only give them proof." The dance ended before Clara could hear more. Edwin and Wren separated as the musicians struck the opening notes of a country reel, each moving toward a different exit. Clara told Nicholas what she had overheard, but by the time he crossed the ballroom, Wren's carriage was already departing, and Edwin had joined Lady Beatrice beside the supper table. "If you accuse him now, he will deny everything," Clara warned. "Then I shall have him watched." "By whom?" "We do not know how many members of your household he controls." Nicholas looked across the room at his cousin. "You expect me to wait while he plans to harm you?" "I expect you to help me make his plan visible." She asked Nicholas to invite Edwin to remain at Ashbourne Hall until the royal audit. A man preparing a trap would be more dangerous inside the house, but he would also be easier to observe. Nicholas disliked the proposal, yet he understood its logic, and publicly offered his cousin the use of the West guest suite. Edwin accepted with such graciousness that Lady Beatrice praised him for supporting a family that had treated him shamefully. When Clara and Nicholas returned to Ashbourne after midnight, they found Mr. Wren waiting in the library with 2 constables and Sir Matthew Greaves, the county magistrate. An iron dispatch box stood open upon the desk. Inside were several bundles of banknotes, a packet of estate bonds, and a velvet pouch containing the late Duke's personal seal. "What is the meaning of this?" Nicholas demanded. Sir Matthew removed his spectacles. "Mr. Wren reported the disappearance of £6,000 from the estate reserve. We traced the dispatch box to Her Grace's former room in the servants' quarters." Clara felt every eye turned toward her. Wren placed a document beside the box. It was a receipt from the Dover packet office for passage to Calais under the name Mrs. Clara Whitmore, dated 3 days hence. "We also found this beneath her mattress," he said. "It appears the Duchess intended to leave England once the money was secured." Nicholas looked at Clara. The hesitation lasted only a heartbeat, but she saw it. 6 months of betrayal, debt, and concealed accounts had taught him to distrust everyone around him. Their growing respect could not erase that wound in a single night. "Did you purchase this passage?" he asked. "No." "When did you last enter your old room?" "Yesterday morning, to collect my prayer book." Wren gave Sir Matthew a meaningful glance. "Then she admits having access." "So do 3 housemaids, 2 footmen, and Mrs. Finch," Clara replied. She approached the dispatch box, but 1 constable blocked her. "Please do not touch the evidence, Your Grace." Clara studied it from where she stood. The lock showed no damage. Wren claimed the reserve key had disappeared from his office that afternoon, shortly after Clara transferred the accounts. Thomas had been seen carrying papers through the corridor, and Clara had dismissed him from ordinary service soon afterward. The story had been constructed from real actions, each twisted into a convincing sequence. Clara used Thomas to steal the key, hid the money in the room she had occupied for years, then punished him to ensure his silence. "Where is Thomas?" she asked. No one answered. Mrs. Finch entered, breathless, and announced that the young footman could not be found. His coat was gone, and a stable horse had disappeared with him. Wren's satisfaction remained carefully hidden beneath concern. "The boy's flight speaks clearly." "It speaks only of fear," Clara said. Sir Matthew lifted the packet office receipt. Do you recognize this signature? The name Clara Whitmore had been written in a close imitation of her hand. Even the upward turn of the final E resembled the labels she had prepared for the morning room accounts. Someone copied it from my inventory sheets. That is possible, the magistrate conceded, but difficult to prove. Clara examined the dispatch box. A faint line of pale dust clung to the lower hinge. Where was this box kept? In the stone strong room beside my office, Wren said. Then it cannot have been there recently. She indicated the dust. That is flour, not stone powder. This box was stored near grain sacks. Edwin stepped closer. A servant might easily have carried flour upon her clothing, but this flour is trapped beneath the hinge. It accumulated while the box remained open. Clara looked at Nicholas. It came from the West Granary, the same place through which the missing harvest passed. Wren dismissed the observation as desperation and urged Sir Matthew to search Clara's dressing room. Nicholas refused. The magistrate reminded him that obstructing an inquiry could be interpreted as protecting stolen estate property. You will not enter my wife's rooms without my presence, Nicholas said, placing himself between Clara and the constables. It was a defense, but a limited one. He still had not said that he believed her. The search began shortly before 2 in the morning. Clara watched strangers empty her drawers, unfold her clothes, and inspect every wedding gift, while Edwin stood in the corridor pretending reluctance. One constable removed the green ledger from beneath her gowns. Wren opened it and immediately declared that its coded marks recorded payments Clara had made to accomplices. "Those are my father's corrections," she said. "Then why was the book hidden in your room?" Nicholas asked. Pain sharpened his voice. Clara realized he had discovered that she had withheld it from him. "Because someone had already entered once, and I did not yet know whom I could trust, including me. Especially you. You gave me the cellar key in front of the man we suspected, without warning me that I was part of your test." The accusation struck him into silence. Sir Matthew confiscated the ledger and ordered Clara confined to Ashbourne Hall pending examination of the accounts. Nicholas could have challenged the order through his title, but his gaze remained fixed on the book she had concealed. His incomplete trust became the final weight against her. He instructed the constables to remain outside her door, claiming it was for her protection, though everyone understood it as imprisonment. As Clara was escorted upstairs, she saw a corner of cream paper protruding from Wren's coat, the edge of an invoice bearing the blue mark used for emergency grain shipments. The date visible above his pocket was the following morning. The money in her old room was not the true objective. It had been planted to occupy the magistrate, isolate Clara, and turn Nicholas against her, while the last of Ashbourne's stolen grain was moved beyond the estate before the royal auditors arrived. Clara waited until the constable outside her door shifted his weight, then crossed to the window. From the second floor she could see the West Granary beyond the formal gardens, its dark roof outlined against the paling sky. 2 wagons already stood beside it. No lanterns were visible, yet men moved between the doors and the old canal road. Wren's invoice had been marked for an emergency shipment, but legitimate grain never left before sunrise. The scales could not be read accurately, and no tenant's delivery could be verified in darkness. She pulled the bell cord. The constable entered instead of a maid. "Send for the Duke. His Grace ordered that you remain undisturbed. Then tell him the West Granary is being emptied. I have no authority to carry messages for a prisoner. I have not been charged with a crime." He looked uncomfortable but did not move. A moment later, an orange light appeared behind the granary windows. Clara smelled smoke before the alarm bell rang. The sound tore through Ashbourne Hall, followed by running feet and shouted orders. The constable rushed into the corridor. Clara seized the brass candlestick from her dressing table and struck the lock until the old wooden frame split. She reached the landing as Nicholas emerged from his room, pulling on his coat. "The granary fire is a diversion," she said. "The wagons were loaded before it began." Sir Matthew appeared behind him. "Return to your room, Your Grace. The stolen grain is being moved along the canal road," Clara continued. "If Edwin destroys the building and its weighing books, he can claim everything burned inside." Nicholas's expression changed. "How do you know the wagons were loaded?" "I saw them from my window." Wren hurried up the stairs carrying a ring of keys. Soot already darkened one sleeve despite the fire having begun only moments earlier. "The western door is jammed," he announced. "We must concentrate the servants around the southern wall." Clara stared at the soot. Wren had been near the granary before the alarm. "The southern wall contains the drying chamber," she said. "If the grain dust ignites, everyone gathered there will be killed." "Do not pretend expertise in matters beyond household sums," Wren snapped. "I inventoried that building for 5 years. The main ventilation shaft runs beneath the north loading platform. Open it, and the heat will be drawn away from the drying chamber." Sir Matthew ordered her confined again, but Nicholas took the constable's keys. "My wife is coming with me. You would obstruct a lawful investigation and endanger the estate upon the word of a suspected thief? I would rather risk my authority on a woman who has been correct at every turn than preserve it by obeying a man whose sleeve bears soot from a fire he claims not to have seen." He handed Clara his cloak, then led her down the stairs before the magistrate could object. They reached the granary to find servants and tenants beating at the southern doors while smoke poured from the roof. Clara ordered them back and directed 4 stable hands toward the north platform. Wren shouted that she would feed the flames, but Nicholas repeated her command under ducal authority. The platform had swollen in years of rain and would not lift. Clara remembered her father showing her the counterweight hidden behind the millstone housing. Thomas had once turned it while playing and received a week's punishment. She found the iron release beneath a layer of plaster, struck it with a mallet, and shouted for the men to pull. The platform rose. A violent column of smoke and sparks burst outward, drawing the fire away from the drying chamber, exactly as she predicted. Moments later, a muffled explosion shook the southern wall, but the pressure escaped through the open shaft instead of tearing through the men assembled outside. The crowd fell silent. Had Wren's instructions been obeyed, dozens would have been standing against the wall when it ruptured. Nicholas looked at the solicitor. "You knew the building plans. They have not been updated in 20 years, Wren stammered. "I made an unfortunate mistake." Clara entered through the north opening with a wet cloth pressed over her mouth. The main storage floor was burning, yet the flames had been set in 3 separate piles, each directly beneath a shelf containing weighing records. This was not an accident caused by a lamp. Near the loading bay, fresh wheel marks crossed a layer of flour and led through the rear doors. The wagons had departed toward the canal. A cry came from beneath the floor. Clara followed it to a maintenance pit, where Thomas Bell lay bound beside 2 unconscious warehousemen. Nicholas cut the ropes and carried the footmen into the open air. When Thomas recovered enough to speak, he said Wren had ordered him to bring the reserve key to the granary. Edwin's men had seized him there, forced him to sign a confession, and intended to leave all 3 prisoners inside the burning building. The confession named Clara as the architect of the theft. Sir Matthew arrived in time to hear the statement, but Wren immediately accused Thomas of inventing the tale to save himself. "The boy stole a horse and fled," he said. "The missing horse is still in its stall," Mrs. Finch called from the crowd. "I checked before coming here." Another piece of the accusation collapsed, yet the magistrate remained cautious. Thomas's word could not overcome a solicitor's standing without physical proof. Clara returned to the loading bay and found a broken wooden tally attached to a length of blue cord. The mark burned into it identified Wagon 17, one of the vehicles supposedly carrying spoiled grain from Mr. Reed's farm 12 years earlier. According to the official accounts, that wagon had been destroyed in an accident the week Clara's father died. "They have been using the same unregistered wagons for years," she said. "The grain will be transferred to barges at Merewood Lock and sold under another estate's name." Nicholas studied the paling eastern sky. The canal gates opened at 6. Once the barges reached the River Avon, they could separate, and the cargo would become nearly impossible to trace. "How many roads reach the lock?" he asked. 2. "The direct road is faster, but Edwin will expect pursuit. The abandoned towpath runs through the flooded meadow. No carriage can cross it. We do not need a carriage." Clara pointed toward the stable yard. "We need the estate's strongest horses, 6 empty wagons, and every tenant who still possesses an original grain receipt." Sir Matthew warned Nicholas that taking an armed party to the lock based upon Clara's theory might be viewed as intimidation of lawful merchants. Nicholas removed the Ashbourne signet ring and placed it in the magistrate's hand. "If she is wrong, you may use that as evidence that I personally authorized every action. If she is right, you will witness why someone needed my wife imprisoned before dawn." For the first time, he had risked not merely his reputation, but the legal authority of his title on Clara's judgment. She mounted the horse Mrs. Finch brought her, and concealed the surviving pages of her father's codebook beneath her cloak. Behind her, farmers climbed onto the empty wagons carrying receipts that could identify their stolen harvest. Ahead, smoke covered the road to Merewood Lock, and the first canal bell announced that the gates would open in less than 40 minutes. Clara led the riders away from the road and onto the abandoned towpath, where summer floods had reduced the ground to black mud. The empty wagons followed at a distance, their wheels sinking so deeply that the tenants had to dismount and push. Nicholas rode beside her without questioning the route, though brambles tore his coat and muddy water reached the horse's knees. When they emerged above Merewood Lock, 2 covered barges were already waiting below the gate. Edwin's wagons stood along the bank, and laborers were rolling the final grain barrels aboard. Clara counted 12 men, 3 of them wearing the Ashbourne livery without the Duke's authorization. "If we approach openly, they may cast the records into the water," she said. Nicholas studied the lockhouse and the narrow bridge spanning the canal. "I can order the keeper to close the lower gate." "Not until we identify the cargo. Edwin will claim you unlawfully detained another merchant's property." She removed one of her father's loose pages from beneath her cloak. Before Sir Matthew confiscated the green ledger, Clara had separated several damaged sheets Mrs. Finch found beneath the wardrobe lining. The symbols on the first sheet referred to wagon numbers and lock charges. "Wagon 17 delivered to barge number 4 every quarter," she said. "The lockkeeper must have recorded each passage." Nicholas pointed toward a stone cottage across the canal. "Then we begin there." They left the tenants hidden among the trees and descended on foot. Mrs. Agnes Pike, the widowed lockkeeper, opened her door only after Nicholas identified himself. At the sight of Clara, the woman's suspicion changed to recognition. "Elias Whitmore's girl," she whispered. Agnes had known her father. 12 years earlier, he had questioned her about barges passing under false names. But before she could bring her books to Ashbourne, Edwin's father threatened to cancel her husband's appointment and remove their family from the cottage. Her husband was now dead, yet Edwin had continued paying her to copy selected entries into new registers. "I kept the originals," she admitted. From beneath the hearthstone, she withdrew 3 oilcloth bundles containing 12 years of lock records. Clara compared the symbols in her father's pages with the entries. Every group of dots corresponded to a barge number. Every slash marked a shipment moved at night. Beside dozens of entries appeared the initials MIC, Merewood Improvement Company. The proof was more extensive than Clara had imagined, but it remained fragile. Agnes's records established that the barges passed through the lock. They did not prove what the vessels carried. "The original manifests will be aboard," Agnes said. "Mr. Wren always collects them after the cargo reaches Bristol." A shout sounded from the canal. The lower gate had begun to open. They had less than 10 minutes. Nicholas instructed Agnes to hide the original books again, and gave her his written protection as Duke, promising that neither Edwin nor Wren could remove her from the cottage without a hearing. Then he and Clara crossed the narrow bridge. Halfway over, one of the decayed boards cracked beneath Clara's foot. Nicholas caught her around the waist before she fell into the rushing channel. For one breath she remained against him, feeling his heart hammer beneath his coat. "I once believed danger would announce itself," he said quietly. "A drawn pistol, a shouted threat, an enemy wearing his true face. When my father died, every man who had praised our family presented a debt or denied a promise. My fiancée ended our engagement the day she learned the estate might be insolvent. Since then, I have treated trust as another door someone might open against me." Clara steadied herself on the railing. "That explains why you tested me at our wedding. It does not make it right." "No," he did not defend himself. "I used your humiliation because I believed the result justified it. I placed you where Edwin could see the key without granting you the dignity of choosing the risk. And when the money was found, you believed the trap more readily because I had once been a servant." Pain crossed his face. "I did. I cannot repair that by asking you to forget it. But I can begin by believing you, while belief still costs me something." Clara looked toward the barges. "Then trust me now. Do not board until I draw their attention." She emerged from the bridge alone and called for the foreman to stop the loading. The laborers laughed when she identified herself as the Duchess of Ashbourne, but their amusement allowed Nicholas to circle behind the lockhouse and reach the second barge unseen. Clara demanded to inspect the grain, forcing the foreman to produce a manifest. It claimed the barrels belonged to Merewood Improvement and contained spoiled meal intended for animal feed. She broke one barrel's wax seal and plunged her hand inside. The grain was clean, dry, and fit for market. More importantly, the inside of the lid bore the branded initials of Samuel Reed. The tenant had marked every barrel made in his cooperage. Clara raised it high enough for the farmers concealed above the bank to see. At her signal, they drove the empty wagons down both approaches and blocked the road. Nicholas stepped from the second barge carrying a tin document case. By authority of the Duke of Ashbourne, this shipment is detained. The hired men hesitated. None wished to attack a duke before 30 tenants who could identify their own barrels. Clara opened the document case. Inside were manifests bearing Wren's signature, lock receipts matching Agnes's hidden books, and letters instructing the Bristol agents to divide the profits between numbered accounts. One letter contained the phrase, "Whitmore's correction book must be recovered before his daughter understands it." It was signed with the letter E. Nicholas read it and looked toward Clara. The document linked Edwin to the search of her room and proved she had been targeted because of her father's evidence. But an initial alone could still be disputed. "We need the account key connecting these numbers to their owners," she said. Nicholas found a second compartment in the case, empty except for blue wax and a fragment of red thread. The key had recently been removed. A shot cracked from the trees. The lockkeeper screamed as the bridge rope snapped and the raised gate lurched downward. Water surged around the barges, tearing the first vessel from its moorings. On the opposite bank, Edwin lowered a smoking pistol. Behind him stood Mr. Wren and 6 armed revenue officers. "There is the thief," Edwin called, pointing at Clara as the barge carrying the stolen grain spun toward the open channel. "She has seized a shipment belonging to the Crown, and my cousin has helped her do it." Edwin had discovered their pursuit, removed the decisive account key, and brought royal officers prepared to arrest them before the remaining evidence could reach Ashbourne. Nicholas seized Clara's arm as the broken mooring rope whipped across the bank. The first barge swung into the current, its hull striking the lock wall hard enough to split 3 barrels. Grain poured across the deck and into the canal. 2 laborers jumped ashore, but a third fell between the vessel and the stone embankment. Clara snatched the remaining rope, wrapped it around a bollard, and shouted for the tenants to pull. Nicholas leaped onto the tilting deck and dragged the trapped laborer clear seconds before the hull struck again. By the time the barge stopped, water had flooded its stern and carried the tin document case away. Clara saw it sink beneath the churned surface, taking the manifests and Edwin's letter with it. On the bank, the revenue officers leveled their muskets. Their commander, Captain Hales, produced a warrant bearing the Crown's customs seal. It identified both barges as government property transporting grain confiscated from smugglers and authorized Edwin Vale to oversee their delivery to Bristol. "That grain belongs to Ashbourne's tenants," Clara said. Samuel Reed held up his original receipt and pointed to his branded barrels, but Captain Hales refused to compare the marks. His duty was to enforce the warrant, not adjudicate private ownership. Wren claimed the tenants had been deceived by Clara into believing common cooperage marks proved possession. Edwin added that she had stolen £6,000 to finance the seizure and intended to sell the grain herself once it reached the coast. The accusation was absurd, but the open dispatch box found in her room, Thomas's disappearance, and Nicholas's armed interception of the barges made it appear possible. "Search the second vessel," Clara urged. "The account key may still be aboard." Captain Hales sent 2 officers below deck. They returned carrying nothing but empty sacks and a small bottle of lamp oil. Moments later, smoke rose from Agnes Pike's cottage. One of Wren's men had slipped behind the lockhouse during the confusion and set fire to the hearth. Clara ran toward it, but the bridge hung broken over the channel. From the opposite bank, Agnes screamed that the original registers were beneath the hearthstone. Flames swallowed the room before anyone could reach her records. Edwin had destroyed the independent proof while royal officers watched the canal. "An unfortunate accident," he said. Clara turned on him. "Your man entered that cottage." "Which man? Name him." She had seen only a gray coat disappearing behind the wall. "Wren wore gray, as did 2 revenue officers and several laborers." Without the registers or the document case, her accusation was merely another claim. Captain Hales ordered Clara arrested for theft, fraud, and interference with Crown property. Nicholas stepped between her and the officers. She acted under my direct command. Your Grace, Captain Hales warned, do not worsen your position. Every wagon, rider, and order given here was mine. The Duchess advised me, but I alone authorized the seizure. Clara stared at him. Nicholas, no. If he accepted full responsibility, the Crown could suspend his control of the estate until a royal inquiry determined whether he had abused his title. With no brother and no son, the nearest adult male relative eligible to manage Ashbourne temporarily was Edwin. Nicholas removed his sword and handed it to Captain Hales. You will not place my wife in chains for obeying her husband's lawful instruction. The officers took him into custody. Edwin could not conceal his triumph. Before the assembled tenants, he announced that he would restore order at Ashbourne and protect them from a servant's ambition and a duke's infatuation. Lady Beatrice's earlier mockery had now become an official explanation for Nicholas's ruin. The farmers were forced to unload their empty wagons and step aside, while the surviving barge passed through the lower gate. Captain Hales allowed Clara to return to Ashbourne under Sir Matthew's supervision, but she was forbidden to access the estate accounts or communicate with Nicholas before the royal audit. Edwin rode ahead to claim the steward's office. By noon, his first order as temporary administrator had dismissed Thomas Bell, removed Mrs. Finch from control of the household keys, and confined Agnes Pike to the Lock Cottage under guard. His second order announced that Clara's marriage settlement would be examined for fraud. If it were invalidated, she would lose both her title and Nicholas's legal protection. In her dressing room, Clara laid the surviving objects across the table: her father's loose-coated pages, the strip of blue paper, the packet office receipt bearing her forged signature, and the false riding crop Edwin had presented as a wedding gift. Every stronger piece of evidence had been seized, burned, or drowned. Mrs. Finch entered by the adjoining wardrobe passage. One of the old servants' routes Edwin did not know remained usable. She brought news that Nicholas had been confined in the county courthouse and would be formally examined at Ashbourne's royal audit in 2 days. Mr. Vale has ordered the west chamber emptied tonight, she whispered. Whatever was hidden there will be gone before morning. Clara turned the riding crop in her hands. The stain had been cleaned from the leather, yet a thin blue residue remained inside the seam. She carefully loosened the silver cap. Beneath it lay several strands of red silk, the same red thread she had seen inside the empty compartment of the document case. The crop was not merely a fabricated relic used to frighten her. It had once concealed the missing account key. Edwin had placed it in her room because he expected Wren to retrieve the contents during the search, then left the empty object behind as evidence, connecting her father to the theft. But he had made one fatal error at the lock. Before the officers searched the barge, Edwin had declared that Clara had seized a shipment belonging to the Crown. The warrant shown afterward described the grain as confiscated property, yet Edwin could not have known which of the 2 covered barges supposedly carried it, without consulting the missing account key. He had identified the cargo before anyone opened a barrel or produced the warrant. Clara took one of her father's coded pages and compared its slashes with the scratches inside the crop's hollow handle. The silver had preserved faint impressions from the tightly rolled key, not enough to read the numbered accounts, but enough to reproduce their order. Edwin believes he has destroyed the only key, she said. Then how can we prove what it contained? Mrs. Finch asked. Clara replaced the cap and looked toward the west wing. We do not prove it yet. We let him believe the key survived, and force him to reveal which account he is most desperate to hide. Before midnight, Clara sent Thomas through the wardrobe passage carrying a message intended to be intercepted. The former maid had decoded her father's final page, and at the royal audit she would name the owner of account number 7. Edwin did not know that the page contained no such name. To silence her, he would have to act upon information only the true architect of the scheme could understand. Thomas left Clara's message on the pantry desk, where Wren's clerk could find it, then returned through the wardrobe passage and waited behind the wall with Mrs. Finch. Within an hour, the clerk carried the note to the steward's office. Edwin read it twice, burned it over a candle, and summoned Wren. Their voices were too low to distinguish, but shortly afterward, both men crossed the west corridor, carrying the master key removed from Mrs. Finch. Clara followed inside the hidden passage, guided by the cellar map she had memorized before its page was stolen. Edwin unlocked the iron door beneath the servants' stairs and entered the chamber where Elias Whitmore had found the duplicate records. Through a gap in the paneling, Clara watched Wren remove a brass cylinder from behind a loose foundation stone. "She cannot possibly have decoded the 7th account," he whispered. "Whitmore never possessed the ownership list." "His daughter has surprised us before," Edwin replied. "Copy the figures we need for the audit, then destroy the key." They carried the cylinder to the library, unaware that Thomas was waiting inside the old dumbwaiter shaft. Wren worked until nearly dawn, using the cylinder's tightly rolled paper to prepare a clean set of estate accounts. When he left to collect sealing wax, Thomas slipped into the room, exchanged the cylinder for the hollow handle of the false riding crop, and lowered the original through the shaft to Mrs. Finch. Clara wrapped it in oilcloth, sealed it with wax bearing her father's inventory mark, and placed it inside a flower bin beneath the morning room floor. Mrs. Finch and Thomas each signed a statement recording the time, location, and condition of the object. Samuel Reed then added his signature without being shown what the bundle contained, establishing that it had remained sealed after leaving the library. Edwin later burned the decoy crop handle in the courtyard and believed the account key had been destroyed. Clara used the remaining hours to protect the people he might silence. Thomas was hidden in the tenant's chapel beneath the care of Mr. Reed. Agnes Pike escaped the Lock cottage through its drainage culvert and arrived at Ashbourne with the metal tally plate her husband had used to stamp every legitimate barge passage. Although her paper registers had burned, the plate's numbered wheel retained the final setting from the previous shipment. Clara sent copies of the witnesses' statements to 3 different tenants, so no single search could destroy them all. At noon the following day, royal auditors transformed Ashbourne's Great Hall into a court of inquiry. Lord Pembroke, the Crown's senior examiner, sat beneath the ducal crest with Captain Hales and Sir Matthew. Nicholas was brought in without his sword and seated apart from Clara. Edwin occupied the steward's chair as temporary master of the estate, while Wren arranged immaculate account books before him. Lady Beatrice and half the county filled the gallery, eager to witness the final disgrace of the Duke who had married a servant. Edwin attacked before Clara was invited to speak. He presented the £6,000 found in her room, the forged receipt for Calais, and a written confession supposedly signed by Thomas Bell. Wren claimed Clara had discovered minor clerical errors, exaggerated them into a conspiracy, and manipulated Nicholas into seizing crown property so she could escape with the estate reserve. "The tragedy," Edwin concluded, "is not merely that a servant coveted a duchess's fortune. It is that my cousin abandoned reason because he could not bear to admit what she was." Murmurs of approval moved through the gallery. Nicholas rose. "Whatever judgment is made against me, my wife will not bear responsibility for my orders." Lord Pembroke instructed him to sit, then asked Clara whether she denied the evidence. "I deny the story constructed around it," she said, "and I ask permission to test each piece in the order it was created." She began with the packet office receipt. Its date placed the purchase on the morning of her wedding, when Clara had remained inside Ashbourne Chapel and breakfast room before more than 40 witnesses. Wren argued that an accomplice could have purchased it, but the supposed clerk's signature belonged to a man who had retired 2 years earlier. Mrs. Finch produced household correspondence confirming his retirement after he returned an incorrectly addressed parcel. Next, Clara examined the forged signature. It had been copied from an inventory label she wrote after entering the morning room. The forger had reproduced a small break in the letter C, caused by a damaged nib she had used only that afternoon. Therefore, the receipt could not have existed when Wren claimed the passage was purchased. Clara then requested Thomas's confession. "The boy fled because he was guilty," Edwin said. "Then perhaps he has returned because he is innocent." Thomas emerged from the tenant's chapel and entered the hall beside Samuel Reed. He testified that Wren ordered him to carry the reserve key to the West Granary, where Edwin's men bound him and forced his thumb against an inked confession he was never allowed to read. Lord Pembroke compared the mark on the document with Thomas's hand. The confession displayed the right thumb. Thomas bore an old kitchen scar dividing that print, yet the mark on the paper remained unbroken. It had been taken from another person. Wren accused the boy of perjury, but Thomas identified the maintenance pit, the bindings and the positions of the 2 warehousemen found beside him. Sir Matthew confirmed each detail. Clara moved to the dispatch box. Flour beneath its hinge proved it had been stored in the granary, and the royal saddler's mark on Edwin's false crop proved he had fabricated an object supposedly belonging to a man dead 4 years before that mark existed. "Sentiment is not fraud," Edwin said, "nor is an innocent error proof that I planted money." "No," Clara agreed, "but impossible knowledge is." She asked Captain Hales to repeat Edwin's first words at Merewood Lock. The officer reluctantly confirmed that Edwin had identified the seized cargo as Crown grain before the warrant was displayed, before the barrels were opened, and before anyone declared which barge carried the supposed government shipment. The warrant listed no vessel number. Edwin could have known only by consulting the private account key used to disguise the stolen grain. Wren interrupted that no such key existed. Clara turned to him. "Then why did you enter the sealed west chamber after intercepting a message about account number 7? His face drained of color. Edwin declared the accusation invented. Mrs. Finch testified that she had watched them through the servants' passage. Thomas described the brass cylinder he exchanged in the library. Samuel Reed produced the oilcloth bundle, its 3 seals still unbroken, and placed it before Lord Pembroke. "That object was stolen from my lawful office," Edwin shouted. Clara looked directly at him. "A moment ago, your solicitor said it did not exist." Silence fell across the great hall. Nicholas stared at the bundle, understanding at last that Clara had preserved the proof without relying upon his title to rescue her. Lord Pembroke broke the first wax seal, then paused when Clara asked him to compare it with the mark beside every correction in her father's surviving pages. If the seal, paper, and coded ownership list matched records already held by the Crown, the cylinder would reveal who controlled each hidden account, who had ordered the grain moved, and who had profited from Elias Whitmore's death. Edwin lunged toward the table, but Captain Hales restrained him. Lord Pembroke removed the oilcloth and lifted the unopened brass cylinder before the entire assembly. Lord Pembroke opened the brass cylinder and withdrew a roll of blue paper secured with red silk. The paper bore the watermark of the same Bath stationer who had supplied the late Duke's private ledgers, while the silk matched the fibers preserved inside the writing crop. At the top of the roll, Wren had written a list of numbered accounts and the initials of their beneficial owners. Account 7 belonged to Edwin Vale. Account 4 belonged to Tobias Wren. Account 1 had belonged to Edwin's father, Sir Malcolm Vale, who founded Merewood Improvement Company shortly before the thefts began. Beside each account appeared dates, barge numbers, and percentages corresponding to the coded corrections in Elias Whitmore's book. Clara placed her father's surviving pages beside the key. The dots identified the same barges recorded in the cylinder. The slashes marked false losses entered against Ashbourne's tenants. Lord Pembroke ordered his clerks to compare the numbers with banking records brought for the royal audit. The balances matched exactly. For 12 years, grain had been removed from the West Granary, declared spoiled in Ashbourne's accounts, and sold through Merewood Improvement under other estates' names. Wren then created false repair expenses and rent increases to conceal the missing income. By making Ashbourne appear increasingly insolvent, the conspirators intended to force the sale of its western farmland to their own company. Edwin would purchase the property cheaply, settle enough debt to appear a family savior, and eventually inherit what remained if Nicholas lost control of the title. Clara had been targeted because Elias taught her the inventory code that connected the false entries. Edwin first searched the library for the green ledger, then encouraged Nicholas to believe ordinary creditors had damaged the desk. When Clara discovered the altered harvest figures, Wren planted the reserve money and forged the passage receipt using her inventory labels. Thomas was forced to provide a false confession, while the granary fire destroyed the weighing records and allowed the final grain shipment to be presented as Crown property. The blue warning ordering Clara into the chamber alone had been written by Wren to lure her beneath the west wing, where she could be detained or killed without witnesses. "And my father?" Clara asked. Lord Pembroke turned to the cylinder's final column. One payment had been issued from Sir Malcolm's account on the night Elias died. Its description read, "Stable assistance, North Road, silence secured." The recipient was a former Ashbourne groom who had disappeared immediately after the supposed riding accident. Edwin insisted that the words proved nothing, but Mrs. Finch testified that Elias never used the North Road, and Clara explained the falsely carved initials on the riding crop. Wren had commissioned the crop years later to create an object connecting Elias to secret payments. The dark substance removed from its handle had not been blood, but aged sealing resin used to hold the account key inside. Edwin gave it to Clara so Wren could retrieve the key during the staged search, while leaving behind a relic that made Elias appear involved in the fraud. Lord Pembroke declared that the payment, fabricated crop and concealment of the accounts justified reopening the investigation into Elias Whitmore's death. Captain Hales placed Edwin and Wren under arrest for fraud, arson, destruction of evidence, conspiracy against the crown, and the attempted murder of Thomas and the warehouseman. Sir Matthew ordered their assets frozen. The stolen profits would first repay Ashbourne's tenants, restore the estate reserve, and compensate Agnes Pike for the destruction of her home. Lady Beatrice attempted to leave unnoticed, but Clara stopped her. "You asked whether the servants should hand me an apron," she said before the silent gallery. "They may, whenever honest work requires it, but no servant in this house will again be treated as though poverty makes truth less valuable." Lady Beatrice lowered her eyes and curtsied. Nicholas then stepped before the royal examiner. He could have allowed Edwin's crimes to excuse his own mistakes, but he did not. He admitted that he had used Clara's humiliation at their wedding to test his cousin, concealed the danger from her, and doubted her when the planted evidence exploited his prejudice. "She preserved this estate after I denied her the trust and authority her judgment had earned," he said. "My title gave me the power to marry her. It did not give me the right to use her courage without her consent." He asked Lord Pembroke to register a new settlement, granting Clara separate property, independent income, and equal authority over Ashbourne's accounts. He restored Thomas and Mrs. Finch to their positions, appointed Agnes official keeper of the canal records, and ordered a memorial erected declaring that Elias Whitmore died while protecting the tenants from theft. When Nicholas and Clara were finally alone in the breakfast room, he placed the brass key on the table between them. "The marriage protected you from Wren's immediate reach, but I know protection is not the same as freedom. If you wish to leave Ashbourne, the new settlement will support you. If you remain, I will not presume that forgiveness has already been given." Clara looked at the place where the guests had laughed at her, only days earlier. "I will remain as Duchess of Ashbourne because the work here belongs partly to me now. But you will court me honestly, Nicholas. No traps, no tests, no decisions made in my name." He bowed. "On your terms." 3 months later, Clara presided over the first public review of the restored estate accounts. Farmers, servants, and noble trustees waited as she examined every figure. An apron lay folded beside her chair because she had spent the morning helping Mrs. Finch prepare food for the tenant families. No one laughed. Nicholas stood at her side, not speaking for her and not hiding behind her accomplishments. When Clara finished, she passed him the ledger so he could sign beneath her name. The woman once expected to remain silent, now determined which truths Ashbourne would preserve, while the Duke, who had placed a secret key in her palm before mocking eyes, waited for her freely given permission before taking her hand.